She walked in quietly, her head held high, but her eyes gave her away nervous, unsure. Dressed simply in a plain blue dress, she didn't draw much attention at first. But as the elegant hall filled with chatter and laughter, people began to notice her. She was alone. No plus one, no fancy jewelry, no designer shoes. Just a simple woman, attending a formal event where most came to be seen, admired, and talked about. Whispers began almost immediately. Some smirked, others exchanged glances. A few even laughed under their breath. To them, she didn't belong there. They didn't know who she was, and that was enough for them to judge. She smiled politely and took her seat near the back, trying her best to blend in. The room buzzed with conversation, and as more well-dressed couples entered, the contrast became harder to ignore. She sat alone at her table, glancing at the door now and then, clearly waiting for someone. Some guests nearby whispered again, did her date stand her up? Why would anyone come to an event like this alone? But she remained calm. She wasn't there to impress anyone. And though their words hurt, she kept her composure. What they didn't know was that she wasn't just anyone. And she wasn't truly alone. Then, just as the event was about to begin, the doors opened one last time. A man walked in, confident, composed, and dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. Heads turned immediately. You could feel the shift in the room. He wasn't just another guest. He was someone important. And he was walking straight toward her. People stared in disbelief. Who was he? And why was he heading to her table? The woman stood up slowly, and for the first time all night, a soft smile formed on her face. But what happened next, what the man revealed, left the entire room stunned and silent. The man reached her side and gently took her hand, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. People who had been laughing minutes ago now sat frozen, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion. Some tried to place him. His face looked familiar, like someone they'd seen in magazines or on the news, but they weren't sure. Others whispered again, but this time with hesitation. Who is he? Why would someone like him be with someone like her? He leaned in close and said something only she could hear. Her smile widened just a little, still soft, still humble. Together, they sat down at the table that had once seemed to empty. Now, it felt like the center of the room. The air had changed. People were curious, even unsettled. A woman at a nearby table whispered to her friend, "I thought she was just someone's assistant." Her friend replied, "No assistant sits like that when he walks in," but no one dared to approach them directly. Not yet. What they didn't know was that the woman Ella was far more than she appeared. She didn't come from money, didn't grow up with connections. She'd worked long hours in a quiet cafe in a small town, barely making ends meet. Her clothes, simple and clean, were often second-hand. But none of that mattered to the man sitting beside her. He, on the other hand, was known to many in the room, though no one could quite believe it was really him. Business leader, investor, occasionally mentioned in articles about philanthropy and global events. A man used to being surrounded by power, attention, and high expectations. So how had these two worlds met? Why did someone like him choose someone like her? And more importantly, what secret was he carrying tonight? Because he didn't just come to attend the event. He came with something to say, something that would change everything. And soon, the very people who once laughed would wish they'd known her better. As the evening moved on, the music played and speeches began, but most eyes kept drifting back to their table. Ella sat quietly, her posture calm but alert. The man Nathan remained close, his attention focused only on her. Their closeness seemed effortless, like they'd weathered things together before, but the silence between them hinted at something still unsaid. Across the room, a woman in a silver gown couldn't take her eyes off them. Her name was Claire, and she'd known Nathan from a time before Ella ever entered the picture. They had once been business partners, maybe even something more, depending on who you asked. She was elegant, polished, and had always believed someone like Nathan would end up with someone like her. When he vanished from the public eye months ago, rumors spread. Some said he was traveling, others believed he was ill, but no one guessed the truth that he had quietly left everything behind to be with someone completely outside that world. Claire's expression hardened as she watched them. She remembered introducing Nathan to her inner circle, including the very people who were now whispering and staring. She also remembered how quickly he'd cut ties. And now, here he was, walking back in like nothing had changed, except everything had, especially the woman beside him. Meanwhile, Ella noticed the stares but said nothing. She was used to judgment, to being underestimated, but Nathan had seen something in her that no one else had. Still, even she didn't know what he was planning tonight. He had told her only one thing before they arrived: "Trust me." In a corner, two journalists from a local lifestyle magazine had started taking notes. They weren't sure if they were witnessing a surprise engagement, a scandal, or a business move disguised as romance. But they were certain it was a story worth following, and just as the host took the stage to introduce the evening's key speaker, Nathan reached into his coat pocket, his fingers brushing over something small but important, something that, when revealed, would send shockwaves through the entire room. Nathan's hand stayed in his pocket a moment longer, his fingers curling around the small velvet box. Ella noticed the slight movement, and though he hadn't said a word, something in her chest tightened. She glanced at him, but he kept his eyes forward, focused on the stage. Whatever he was planning, she knew it wasn't simple. Not with all these people watching. Not with the past he'd left behind sitting just a few tables away. The host's voice echoed through the hall, praising the achievements of the night's honored guests. But few were listening. Whispers had started again. Phones buzzed silently under tables. The journalists had already sent quick texts to their editors. Something was happening, and they were going to be the first to report it. Claire, still watching closely, leaned in to speak to a man beside her, an executive who once worked under Nathan. She asked casually, "Did you know he was coming tonight?" The man shook his head. "Last I heard, he was off-grid. No meetings, no calls. He's been avoiding everyone." Ella could feel the energy shift again. The air grew heavier with every passing second. She wasn't someone who liked being the center of attention, but here she was right in the middle of a moment no one seemed to understand. She wanted to ask Nathan what he was doing, what he was about to reveal, but something in his stillness told her to wait. Nathan finally turned to her, his voice low. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked. She gave a small nod, unsure but trusting him. He stood up slowly, causing heads to turn again. Conversations halted. Even the host paused for a brief second, sensing the shift in attention. Everyone was watching now. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out the box, but he didn't open it yet. Instead, he looked directly at a group of people near the front, people who once claimed to be his closest allies. And then, with the spotlight finding him at just the right time, he stepped forward to speak, but no one was prepared for what he was about to say. Nathan stood tall, the small box still in his hand, but he made no move to open it. The room, once buzzing with casual chatter and polite laughter, had fallen into a sharp, waiting silence. All eyes were on him. Even the cameras at the back of the hall, meant to record the evening's highlights, slowly shifted their focus. Ella sat still, her heart pounding, unsure if she was about to witness something beautiful or something dangerous. Then Nathan spoke, his voice steady, but with a weight behind each word. "I came tonight not just to honor the event or the people here, but to tell the truth." A ripple moved through the crowd. Claire leaned forward, a sense of unease creeping into her perfect posture. The journalists exchanged glances. They knew this was no longer a social moment, it was news. Nathan continued. "There's been a lie circulating in this industry, one that cost people their positions and left others to clean up behind closed doors. I stayed silent to protect someone I cared about, but that silence ends tonight." A murmur rose among the guests. The very people who'd once shut doors on him were now squirming in their seats. Names weren't mentioned, not yet, But everyone felt the target hovering nearby. Ella felt the shift too. She had known Nathan carried burdens, but not the full story, and certainly not this. The man she'd fallen in love with was many things kind, grounded, and fiercely private, but she hadn't known he was connected to a financial scandal that had quietly made headlines months ago. A scandal the press had eventually dropped. Because someone powerful had made it disappear, Nathan's eyes moved to Claire's table. When I walked away, I didn't lose everything. I found something better, but it's time the truth comes out, even if it means losing what little I have left. He raised the box slowly but still didn't open it. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, a man from the back of the room stood up suddenly, and that's when everything began to unravel. The man from the back of the room strode forward, tall, sharp-suited, and clearly familiar to many in the crowd. His name was Marcus Hale, one of the board members of a major firm Nathan once led, and the very person some suspected had benefited the most when Nathan walked away. He didn't wait for an invitation. "Nathan," he said loudly, "this isn't the place for personal drama. You left. You signed everything over. What more do you want?" Nathan didn't flinch. Instead, he looked directly at Marcus and said, "I want the truth. And I want people to know who actually orchestrated the cover-up." Gasps broke out across the room. Now, the truth was emotion. Nathan opened the box not to reveal a ring, but a tiny flash drive, small enough to miss, powerful enough to ruin reputations. "This has every record, every false transaction, every manipulated report, and emails yours included." Marcus's face paled, but he quickly recovered. "You think anyone will believe her?" he snapped, gesturing toward Ella. "She has no name, no background. She's nothing," and that was his mistake. Nathan stepped closer, voice firm. "She's the only one who stood by me when all of you turned your backs. She saw what you did in the truth, and she helped me find the missing documents. She's the reason any of this is happening." The crowd shifted again. The people who had once whispered about Ella's dress, her quiet entrance, her background now looked at her differently. She wasn't just a guest. She was the key to everything. Marcus tried to protest, but the event organizers were already motioning to security. Journalists stood, recording every word, cameras flashing. Nathan placed the flash drive in the host's hand. "Do with it what's right," he said, but just as the room started to settle, Ella stood up. She reached into her own purse, pulled out a second flash drive, and said quietly, "There's more." And in that moment, even Nathan turned to her surprised. Nathan stared at Ella, stunned, as the room held its breath once again. She met his eyes and spoke calmly. "You had the records, but I found the internal memos. Emails they thought were deleted. I've been working quietly with someone on the inside." She turned to the crowd, her voice growing stronger. "For months, I watched people laugh at me, doubt me, assume I was just lucky to be with someone like him. But I didn't come here for approval. I came because people deserve to know the truth." There was no applause, no loud reaction, just a heavy silence full of realization. The second flash drive was taken and handed off to an investigative team present for the event. And just like that, the story shifted. No longer about a woman attending alone. No longer about a man with a mysterious past. It became about courage, truth, and unexpected strength. Claire quietly left her table, her gaze down. Marcus, flanked by security, had no choice but to walk out of the room, knowing the damage was already done. The cameras had it all. The headlines were already being written. "Simple woman and her husband expose corporate scandal," or "Unexpected couple brings down corruption at high-profile gala." Nathan took Ella's hand, his voice soft again now that the storm had passed. "You didn't tell me you had it. I wanted to make sure we were ready," she replied with a smile. They walked out of the venue not as a mystery, not as gossip, but as something more: partners, true equals, quietly powerful in a room that once overlooked them. And for those who laughed at her when she walked in alone, they'd never forget what happened that night. Because in a world obsessed with image, she reminded everyone that strength doesn't need to be loud, and the quietest ones often hold the loudest truths. Sometimes, it's the simple woman no one sees coming who changes everything.